For decades, the whole story of computing has been written in silicon, right? We've just been building faster and faster chips, cramming them into smaller spaces. But what if the next giant leap for AI doesn't come from a factory at all, but from a lab? We're about to get into something that sounds like pure science fiction, but trust me, it's quickly becoming science fact.
So I really want you to just let that question sink in as we go through this. Because what we're talking about here isn't just a small step forward. It's a total fundamental shift in how we even think about computing. We're talking about moving away from, these cold, rigid circuits to something that's alive, something that's adaptable. We're talking about biology.
Okay, so why would we even go down this road? Well, to get it, we've got to look at the OG computer, the human brain. And what's so wild is the contrast you see here. A supercomputer, it will absolutely destroy a person at pure math. I mean, it's not even a competition. But when you start throwing messy, complex, uncertain information at it, stuff that's incomplete, the brain is just in a totally different league. It really is like the difference between a drag racer built for one straight line and an all-terrain vehicle that can handle anything you throw at.
And this number right here, this just perfectly shows you the mind-boggling scale of that difference. Get this. Back in 2013, one of the most powerful computers in the world needed 40 minutes just to simulate 1 single second of activity in only 1% of a human brain. Just think about that for a moment. That's the kind of insane efficiency we haven't even begun to tap into. So the real question becomes, what if we could just harness that biological power directly?
And that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. We're entering the dawn of biological computing, or as some are calling it, intelligence in a dish.
So, the key ingredient here is something called a brain organoid. And look, we need to be super clear about this. These are not tiny little brains in a jar. That's sci-fi. What they are these three-dimensional clusters of human brain cells that, and this is the amazing part, they actually self-organize. They build themselves into structures that start to look and act like parts of a developing brain, even forming neural networks and showing real electrical activity.
And that is what leads us to this brand new field, organoid intelligence, or OI for short. This is really the new frontier. The big idea is to basically hook up these brain organoids to computers to create a totally new kind of hybrid biocomputer, one that can actually learn, remember, and process information.
Okay, but how does this actually work in practice? Well, think of it in a few steps. First, at the very center of it all, you have the brain organoid. That's your biological processor. Then you send it some kind of input, like little electrical signals. The organoid reacts, right? And that reaction, its neural output, gets recorded by a whole bunch of tiny sensors. Now here's the really crucial part. An AI, a traditional AI, reads that data, figures out what it means, and then decides what signal to send next. It creates this constant biofeedback loop that actually teaches the organoid how to learn.
So, you see, this isn't a passive thing where we just sit back and watch the organoid. No way. We're actively teaching it. And this is where that amazing connection between artificial intelligence and, well, actual intelligence really comes to life.
Yeah, as this quote puts it, the AI is basically the teacher in this relationship. It sends a signal, it reads the response, and then it sends another signal to encourage certain reactions. Kind of like training a puppy. And believe it or not, in the early experiments, this exact loop has already allowed these organoids to show the very beginnings of learning and even short-term memory.
Now, if you want to get technical, the name for this technique is reservoir computing. The easiest way to think about it is that the organoid itself is like this big, complex, messy reservoir of neurons. You just drop a signal in one end, let it slosh around, get processed by all the chaos inside, and then you read what comes out the other end. The AI's only job is to learn how to interpret that output, and by changing what it drops in, it can actually train the reservoir to do stuff, like recognizing speech, or, and this has actually been done, playing a simple game of Pong.
Okay, so we've seen the absolutely incredible scientific potential here. It's mind-blowing. But like with any technology this powerful, you have to look at both sides of the coin, right? We have to talk about the flip side, the promise and the peril. What are the huge benefits, and what are the really deep ethical challenges that come with creating a new form of intelligence?
Let's start with the promise, because especially for medicine, it's just staggering. For the very first time, we could have a way to study the living, breathing mechanics of human cognition outside of a person. Just imagine being able to grow a model of a specific patient's Alzheimer's disease in a dish. You could test thousands of potential drugs on that living tissue to see what actually works without ever harming a person. I mean, this could completely revolutionize how we understand and treat neurological diseases.
But here's the thing. The very success of this research leads us straight into its biggest problem. The better we get at making these things act like a real brain, the closer we get to having to answer some unbelievably difficult ethical questions. It's a real catch-22.
Yeah, researchers actually have a name for this. It's called the Greeley dilemma. And it goes like this. The more your lab model acts like a human brain so you can study a disease, the more it might start to gain the very things like sentience or maybe even consciousness that would make it completely unethical to experiment on in the first place. It is a massive, profound paradox at the heart of this entire field.
We are sailing into totally uncharted waters here. And we have to start asking these questions. I mean, at what point does a little blob of cells deserve moral status? Could one of these things ever feel pain? Could it be aware? Are we crossing a fundamental line by creating something that thinks in a lab? And these aren't questions for some distant future. Scientists and ethicists are debating them right now.
So, when you boil it all down, organoid intelligence is so much more than just a new kind of computer. By blurring that line between a machine and a living thing, it's forcing us to look in the mirror and ask some of the biggest questions there are. What is intelligence? What is consciousness? And what does it really mean to be human?
And that leaves us and you with one last really tough question to think about. It really sums up the entire promise and the peril of this whole thing. Would you support creating a thinking entity in a lab if you knew it held the key to curing something like Alzheimer's? It's a tough one. The potential to heal is just massive, but the ethical stakes, they're higher than ever. And there is no easy answer.